Hello, my name is Jim Brady and welcome to an information session about the new middle school project here in Walpole. For most of you who don't know me, I am originally from Walpole. I was town moderator for about close to 10 years, 9 years I believe. I have a law practice here in Walpole and have been involved in community affairs for well over 35 to 40 years. I'm very happy to participate in this forum today. I'm being joined by Jen Gayotzis, who's the member of the school committee as well as the school building committee, and Brian Jarvis with Compass, who is the project director for the upcoming proposal for the middle school. So why don't I turn it and let Jen and Brian both introduce themselves.
Hi, I think you did a pretty good job. I'm on the school committee, as he said, and have been working on this project for some time now, trying to get information out to Walpole, and this is a great opportunity to talk to all of you.
Certainly is. And Brian?
Thanks, Jim. Brian Jarvis, Project Director for Compass Project Management. I work for the OPM, or the Owner's Project Manager firm, for this project. I am a resident. I had 2 kids that went through Bird Middle School, graduated from the high school. And I was project manager for the municipal projects, the fire station, the police station, and the senior council on aging building here in town.
Well, they came out great.
Thank you.
By the way, they were I didn't realize that, and they were beautifully done.
Yeah, great projects.
Yeah, they really were. Well done. So let's talk about this project. And I'll throw it out to both of you. Yeah, how do we know that there's a real need for this brand new middle school?
The buildings were examined by the Massachusetts School Building Authority. That's an agency in the state that looks at all the buildings and examines competing needs. So we entered into a process where it was a pretty extensive process over years, and they looked into the state of the buildings, checked out the sites, and determined after weighing competing interests across the state that Walpole needed to get the buildings done. So they let us into the program. Both of our buildings were built in the 60s. They're incredibly old. They're near the end of their lives. Some of the issues we're having are plumbing systems. HVAC are about to go, and they would be incredibly expensive to replace, if not impossible. There's also space limitations that are an issue, so the tech and special education, the classrooms, they don't fit in the spaces any longer, and we've really been moving things around and trying to make do, but at this point, we've really outgrown the buildings.
Okay, Brian.
Yeah, I'll add to that, as Jen mentioned. I mean, the MSBA is a very formal process for applying to and to get into their grant process. I think Walpole established a need almost 10 years ago with the McGuire report, identifying buildings in town, including the municipal buildings that we mentioned earlier that needed a need. They also identified the middle schools as an urgent need. So the town did apply. The MSBA process is very competitive. The MSBA is a very thorough vetting process to make sure that the towns they are addressing have that need, because again, they're turning down a majority of the towns apply in a given year to go forward with certain towns. So they want to make sure that the need is very clear, that the district has a viable ability to do that option, whatever they decide on, and then they're willing to partner with them and move forward. So it's been a good process. So
I can tell you both from a personal perspective that there is definitely a need. I was, I really don't want to tell you my age on this little infomercial, if you will, but suffice to say that I'm now in the group of seniors, and I was the first class to enter what was then called West Junior High School. They built that in the fall of, they were building it and completing it in the fall of 1966. We were doing double sessions at East Junior High School, with now Bird Middle, at the time that they were building West Junior High School. And we moved in there in January of 1967, before we even put a man on the moon. That's how long ago this was. And there's just no doubt that we need to upgrade these schools, and I know that we'll talk about this in a minute, why should we build a brand new school versus trying to upgrade the existing schools. But I know that when you look at Walpole over the past 25 to 30 years, 25 years ago, we acquired the elementary school on Elm Street from a church. We bought that from a church. We ended up doing the Boyden School, the Fisher School, and the Old Post Road School. All 3 of those elementary schools were upgraded or added on to in some fashion. We acquired the Elm Street schools I mentioned, and then we did the high school project. So we did an awful lot of work on the schools back then. But what we didn't do is we didn't touch the middle schools, because at the time, the middle schools were performing well. But that's 25 years ago, and things happen, things deteriorate over 25 years, and things change, as we know. The beauty of all that was, as a result of doing those overrides back then, one of which was a general override, we were able then to go out and do fire, the projects that you were doing, Brian, fire station, police station, and the senior center, without having to go out to the taxpayers for another override, which was actually a beneficial thing, I think, because we desperately needed these buildings. And now it seems like it's time for the middle schools. Now my question, I guess, to either one of you is, why do we need to build a brand new middle school versus renovating the two existing middle schools we have now? And I'd like to talk about what the cost is of comparable cost between building a new school versus renovating the old schools.
Sure. I can start on that one. So, I mean, renovating schools is an option. It's an option in a lot of different communities. It's an option on different buildings, and you have to kind of look at the big picture of what you're trying to accomplish. I think, as Jen pointed out, is that the schools that currently as constituted, as you pointed out, the middle school programs from a school perspective have been changing rapidly over the last however many years, and to actually change the layout, change some of the size of classes, the types of rooms that you need now to address the current program, special education, science and technology, that has all moved down into the middle school level over the last few years. So to do that in an existing building would require a major interior renovation of both of those schools. So it doesn't mean it rules it out, it just means that that's what we require to actually bring those kind of buildings up to the current teaching program and teaching model in the school. So what ends up happening is everyone thinks, would renovation be less expensive? And the MSBA actually, as part of their process, they make you investigate all of those options. So they make you look at what's called a base repair. Basically, just bring those buildings up to code. No aesthetic upgrades, no infrastructure, no classroom upgrades, no fixture upgrades. Just get everything up to code, whether that's accessibility code, whether that's structural code, energy code. Just do those repairs to those buildings and bring them up to code.
And I assume that was done, correct? That analysis was done?
That analysis was part of this process. It was all vetted through the building committee. All that information went into the MSBA because they look at that option as well, because they want to make sure that at the end of the day, whatever the town or the district chooses is also the most cost-effective solution. You're just not building a new school for the sake of building a new school or something of that nature. So they want to see what those other options look like, both from a scope perspective and a price perspective. They also make you look at an ad renovation option. So we did that as well. We looked at an ad renovation option. The thing you have to keep in mind with these two existing schools is they're only for half the population. So even if you were to just renovate one of the schools as a solution, you still need to put a very significant addition onto those buildings to be able to accommodate all of the students and the enrollment of 905, which is what the MSBA came up with. So obviously, on the surface, renovations should be less expensive. The issue that Walpole faces, unlike some other towns that maybe choose a renovation, is you don't have a combined middle school to start with. So you'd have to go down an ad renovation route. And at the end of the day, that ends up being not always less expensive, because things that ends up happening in a renovation project is the project gets longer, because you usually can't empty out the school entirely and just do the project. You'd have to find swing spaces for the students, whether that's temporary classrooms. Some towns are lucky. They've done projects over the years. We did a project for the city of Newton. They've taken an old building offline, and they're using that building to shuffle elementary schools while they update their other elementary schools. Walpole doesn't necessarily have that at their disposal. So that starts driving up the time of the project, which drives up the cost for the contractor, the cost for the architect, the cost for the OPM to be on site. The project's longer. You have these peripheral costs of temporary classrooms. So at the end of the day, it's not necessarily all that less expensive than a new building. The fact that you have two schools and would have to do that process all over again, that is really the rub with Walpole, is that if you do the first building with Byrd, with MSBA funding, and you want to do the second building at Johnson with MSBA funding, you have to go through their process again. They make you wait to complete the first project. They make you reapply. It could be 8 years plus by the time you started that second project, in which time costs have gone up. Now that second project, even if you get MSBA funding, is a lot more expensive than what you currently have. You add those two projects together, it's more expensive at the end, it's more to the taxpayer. Other towns also look at it and say, well, we don't want to wait for the MSBA, we're just going to do that second project as quickly after the first project as possible. We're doing that right now with Wellesley. They're doing 2 elementary schools. The first one with MSBA funding, the second one they're going to fund all by themselves. So they're doing one project, they're getting some reimbursement, they're doing an entire second project. All of that goes on the taxpayer. So when you do that math in Walpole, that's a higher project cost and it's a higher burden to the taxpayer at the end of the day. So from Walpole's perspective, the combining the schools decision into a new building was the most cost-effective decision.
So Jen, I know you've been talking about this Lincoln, town of Lincoln their experience with waiting.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize that you were looking at an 8 to 9 year lag between doing Johnson first, let's say, and then Bird, or vice versa.
Yeah, if you look at the math, you have to finish that first project, which usually start to finish on the MSBA could be up to 5 years between design and construction.
Yeah.
You reapply with a statement of interest, just like we did on this project.
Mm-hmm.
We're 3 years in from when that statement of interest was accepted. So this project's been going on for 3 years just to get to this decision point. You then have another year of design and then 2 or 3 years of construction. You do that math, that's 8 to 10 years before you touch another
That
school.
doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
Yeah, so tell us about Lincoln. I know you were telling me before we started this about Lincoln. I'm interested for people to share that with people.
I think the question people have is what happens if this override doesn't pass? And I like to look at a neighbor, in this case Lincoln, to see what would happen. And in that case, Lincoln had a project that was $48 million. They were trying to build an elementary school in 2012. And at that point, they were going to get $21 million of state funding. So they would have only had to pay $28 million and borrow to pay for that. They decided no, they didn't pass the override, and then they decided they still needed it because this is the issue, right? You have these aging buildings, the need doesn't go away.
They only get older.
Exactly. So
Right.
what did Lincoln do? They said, well, hey, we're going to go back to the MSBA. They tried 3 more times in 2013, 15, and 16, and the MSBA didn't allow them into the program. So finally, it's 2018, and Lincoln decides, well, we really need this building. What are we going to do? And at a price tag of $93.9 million, they finally built it and paid for it all by themselves. So here they had the option of state funding, and they didn't take advantage of it. So that's what I really encourage the voters to think about. We have $37.9 million that we obtained of state funding, and we should take advantage of it and don't make the same mistake Lincoln did.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a guarantee that if you reapply afterwards that you get accepted back in. I mean, everyone
Right.
says, well, you could reapply and still get funding. Well, you can, but you can also not get it, like in Lincoln's example, and then you're on the hook for the entire cost of the project, even if it's a less expensive project. I mean, it could be 90 million, maybe come up with an option that's 90 million, but you're still paying all 90 million versus what's on the project right now.
So Brian, I've not been intimately involved in the process thus far. I mean, I'm keeping an eye on it, obviously. But I had a question about and I don't think we need to go into details. I think there's a lot of information out there about the project and so forth. But I do hear people saying, well, there's too many frills in this proposal. So tell us a little bit about that. Not exactly, but what's in the proposal, and what is frilly, if there is such a thing?
Well, we put a charge into the design team immediately that we needed to make sure that this was a cost-conscious and cost-effective solution. So I think from this perspective, we're at a stage where we think we have absolutely what is needed and nothing more, nothing less. There's nothing very frilly about it. I think the frills are coming to the fact that you actually have the square footage that the programs need. You have some of the technologies and the fixtures of a new school, of a modern school that the program needs. And that's something that's going to be vetted all the way through by the building committee. I mean, if this project gets approved, we're only starting the design phase. There's a whole nother eight months to a year of design that needs to go on that the building committee will vet through all of the fixtures and finishes to make sure that we're maintaining budget and making sure that it is cost effective and cost conscious.
So, all right. So the next question that follows for me is, because one of the issues for some people is, okay, if my child is going to school at Johnson, they're going to be on a bus a long time to get over to Bird. So why was the Bird site chosen over the Johnson site chosen, or some other potential site? Why wasn't another site chosen? Maybe did you even consider that?
Yeah. So an issue that it's similar in a lot of different towns. The issue is that there's usually not a site that's big enough to house a modern school facility, not only just the building, but the parking that's required, parking that's required by code, the circulation to actually get to and from the site. And that's before you start talking about things that might be, athletic fields or something of that nature. So there's a lot of projects where they just don't have the room in town. So I'm finishing up a project right now in the town of Natick, their middle school. We built that school within 50 feet of the existing school because that was the best site for that project as far as being located within the town, and also is just big enough that it could actually house a new project like that. The building committee we started with about 19 conceptual options before the school committee and the building committee decided to go with the consolidated model. Those 19 got whittled down to 6, to a short list of 3, and ultimately the Bird site was selected, and it was put up against a lot of different criteria, how it met the educational program. So at the end of the day, if you're spending this money, you want to make sure that, yes, it's meeting what you need to be met in your educational program. You don't want to necessarily do without something when you're spending all this money? Can you get that solution cost effectively? They looked at it from a traffic perspective, they looked at it from a cost perspective, they looked at it from a schedule perspective. Again, the ad reno is adding longer duration, it's impacting the kids in the school, they looked at it from that perspective. The traffic perspective, an interesting part about Bird was it actually lined up with what the McGuire report found about 10 years ago. It gives you access to 2 major roads in town, whereas the Johnson site, not so much. You had to go through a neighborhood maybe to get to the back of that site. So that was something that the building committee looked into in a lot of detail. Traffic studies were done. We vetted it with public safety. That was a big aspect of this. It also is using a site that's already developed. It's not necessarily going into a green space. And then from a site perspective, the Johnson site, one of the factors is it really limits what you can do with that site long term simply because of the proximity to the wells. So keeping the site, keeping the Bird site, putting the building where the building is proposed allows the fields at Bird to stay in use, allows fields to be accessed by the school, both for programming, extracurricular, community activities. Whereas Johnson, you might not have an opportunity to make a field in the future if you wanted to have a field. A lot of schools we do today, they actually put in new fields with their middle schools simply because that's in their programming. So I think at the end of the day, when the building committee looked at all of them, that was the best solution and most cost-effective solution for the project.
Jen, anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say what I liked is that with their expertise, we made a grid. And we color-coded a grid. That's been out on Facebook, so people can look at that. But you weighed all the options, and you tried to figure out pros and cons of each site, considering traffic and stuff, like he said. And at the end of the day, you have a winner that emerges, and that's what we chose. And we considered all those options. The fields was a big one, because there were even a couple different parcels you could have developed, and you could have moved it around on the site of Bird. So ultimately, we thought about stuff like the fields and the aquifers and made this big matrix. So it was an in-depth conversation we had with a lot of different members from different boards that are on the school building committee to thoroughly vet all the sites.
Yeah, and some of the options at Bird, that were considered, you're trying to avoid some of those peripheral costs that we mentioned previously. So the ad reno, you're talking about having a potential farm of modular classrooms on site somewhere, or if you build it on the field, now do you need to recreate that field somewhere else on site, and that's an added cost. Or if you go off site and have to do a new baseball field, then you need to acquire a site and pay for it. And the MSBA doesn't reimburse any of those items because they're not directly related to the school itself.
So you mentioned costs. I think that the situation, and anytime you're looking at an override, and I don't care what town it is costs. That's what drives these, in my opinion.
100%.
I know Norwood, for instance, went through a very detailed analysis. And by the way, I recently learned that your company was the one that did Norwood High School. And I think it was a stellar project. It looks tremendous. Beautiful. I was just driving by there the other day with my wife. We were saying how beautiful that building is. And I know the former principal, George Yusevich, was thrilled to get that on board. You know George?
Yeah, George. Yeah,
he's quite a character.
Yeah, we're still in touch today.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy. Cost, I think, is of huge concern to people.
Absolutely.
And it should be. We're all taxpayers. We all live in the community. So let's talk about costs. Jen, what's your sense on the affordability of this and the overall cost, and could it be done for any cheaper money?
Yeah, so I think the big thing to remember is the state funding. We decided to wait until we got into the MSBA program in order to proceed with this. We had tried in 2 previous years and were unsuccessful, and rather than bringing it to the voters at that point, we decided we would wait until we got the funding. So in a project that costs approximately $116 million, we've obtained $37.9 million. That's huge. So what that amounts to for an average taxpayer is $438. Now, mind you, that number is a little on the high end because of the fact that we were using a conservative borrowing rate. We don't have control over borrowing rates, obviously, but we used a 3.5 to get to that number. And it's my understanding that there's been some projects in different towns that have come in at a lower number, so it's possible that number can go down. In addition, when you look at the debt schedule, there is some debt rolling off of the debt schedule, or I believe one of the renovations here, for instance. So I think the price will go down over time, so some of that will roll off and the 438 number will be less. But yeah, we realize cost is a big factor. Like I said, that was part of the reason why we waited to advance this until we got the state funding.
Well, let's go back. I want to go back to one thing. In terms of cost, were there any studies done by any entity or any group other than the town or the school committee or the school committee, school budget committee, to look at the costs of renovation work. Okay, so in other words, was there an independent or an outside or another study done by some other entity or group to argue that this $115 million cost really could be done for less money that you're aware of?
So I think that was all part of this process, was
Right.
you have to weigh the different options, and the MSBA forces us to look at the option of renovation.
Okay, well, I know that, but what I'm getting at is, one of the things that I know people are opposed to, and there's a group of individuals, people in the town that are really arguing, vote no against this. You know, it's not the arguments being made by those people are the same arguments that were made 25 years ago, by the way, about why people should vote no, you know. And one of the arguments is that renovations, and I'll quote, renovations of both schools, Johnson and Bird, would cost far less. So where is the evidence that tells us it's going to cost far less? Are you aware of any?
No.
No, and I think this is what I alluded to earlier, is that if you take each building in a vacuum and say, could we renovate one building for less than the current project? I mean, I think the answer is going to be yes, that one building would be less expensive. But the problem is it's only solving half the problem, right? You have another building that you need to address. You have another half of the student population in middle school that you need to address. And then when you start talking about the timing of how you do both of those projects with and without the MSBA funding, as Jen mentioned, is when those two projects added together start equaling more money over time and a bigger tax burden over time than this one individual project. Because anytime you start delaying the start of construction and when construction happens, I mean, those prices are only going up. You've seen that. I think you've alluded to the McGuire report. I mean, the McGuire report came up with you should do a combined middle school in 2013. It will cost you $60 million. Well, that's almost 10 years ago now,
Right.
and the construction costs have done nothing but go up. The MSBA tracks all of that. Everything we submit to the MSBA from a cost perspective, they're tracking dollar per square foot of all the projects they've ever done. They're keeping a tight eye on this because they also base their funding on where the market is, and you're trying to keep it as cost effective as possible, because that's one of the things that really keeps the cost for towns down, is being as close to possible as the MSBA's reimbursement policies allow, so that you can maximize that reimbursement. Now, there's things that come in and out of that equation for each town that maybe some things are ineligible from an MSBA's perspective, but it's critical to that town. But the goal is get yourself a cost-effective dollar per square foot building and maximize that reimbursement on a program that meets what the town needs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed that when the Finance Committee took a vote on this project, which I believe is Article 14 on the upcoming town meeting warrant, they voted 13-1-0, which is pretty unanimous. And there was one person that felt for some reason they didn't think they couldn't back this. But I know, and I believe it's the philosophy of the current moderator, but when I was moderator, I appointed people to committees, particularly the Finance Committee, that were, in my opinion, fiscally prudent, okay? Because when you're spending the taxpayers' dollar, you have to remember it's not your money, it's other people's money, it's the taxpayers' money. And I've always applied this standard of the reasonably prudent person standard. And what that means is I'm an attorney, so we like to use those terms. But in all seriousness, if you're a trustee, for instance, of a trust, you have to act in a fiduciary capacity, and you have to act prudently. Now, it doesn't mean you don't spend money on behalf of the trusts. It means if you're going to spend money, you have to do it wisely. You have to do it fiscally responsibly, and you have to be conservative in nature. And I happened to be looking recently at the town meeting warrant, and I was looking at the people on the Finance Committee, and I know almost everyone on that Finance Committee. It's changed since my time there, or my time of appointment. And I believe, and I think some of them there's some very fiscally conservative people on that committee, and I think that's a wonderful thing, because we should not be spending taxpayers' money willy-nilly. And those opposed to this project, it seems to me, would have you believe that this is just some outlandish, crazy idea that, oh my God, we should just, these school people just want everything they want. And that's what you hear all the time. I'm sure you've heard it, Jen.
Yeah. I've been hearing it, but unfortunately, we've been talking about this ever since I got in school committee almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
There's been a need, and we've been trying to figure out the best way to handle it. And I believe this is it.
And as I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of the other projects that needed to be done. I think the time now is for the middle school to be done. It desperately needs to be done. I mean, West Junior High School was open when I was there. That was a long, long time ago. So I think it's time. I want to talk a little bit about this issue of senior citizens and the fiscal issue, okay? Because that really is the argument that oftentimes people make. And I kind of consider that somewhat of a scare tactic on a personal note. This was the same argument we saw when we did all the other school buildings over 20 years ago, and we did the high school 25 years ago. For those people who are concerned about being able to pay an increase, and I should note that $438 is the median. There's going to be people with lower income that are going to pay less than that, and people with higher income are going to pay more than that. I'm reading that correctly, right?
Yeah, it's based on assessed value. So
yeah, assessed value. So I suggest, and I bring this to people's attention, if you're interested in, if you think you may have difficulty paying future taxes, or if you're having difficulty paying taxes now, there's a myriad of programs you can take advantage of. So you can, under Chapter 59 of the General Laws of Massachusetts, you can go down to Town Hall right now and meet with the Board of Assessors. If you're elderly, you're over 65 years of age, okay, and your income is under certain criteria, you can get up to a $2,000 tax exemption. That means you don't have to pay the tax. For older citizens, there's a different program available, $350 tax exemption. For anybody at all of any age in this community that can't afford to pay the taxes on their property tax, you can petition the Board of Assessors, and at their discretion, they can reduce your tax rate, reduce your taxes to be spent, or they can eliminate the need to pay taxes at all if you can, argue a hardship case. If you're a veteran of any age, or a surviving spouse of a veteran, again, there's tax relief here. And then there's also a program which I don't think a lot of people know about, but it's called the Tax Deferral Program. Mm-hmm. So what you do is if you simply are having difficulty or it meets certain criteria, which basically is if you're a single person with an income of less than $61,000 a year, or a married couple with an income of under $92,000 a year, you can defer payment of your taxes. And what does that mean? That means you simply wait until a later date to pay your taxes, either when you sell the property or they will be paid after your death. So there's no reason that anybody in this town would have to move out of town to if this vote goes through. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. I'm sure you guys are well aware of it, but also to those people viewing today. The other thing that comes to my mind on this whole issue of taxes is property values. So I have a lot of people say, well, I don't care about property value. I'm not moving. I don't want to be forced out of my house, and I don't want to move. Well, you don't have to move, okay, because of the programs I just outlined. But equally important is property value really equals equity value in your property. So if your property value goes up, your equity goes up, okay? So if you're considering, for instance, refinancing, or you wanted to add a line of credit, or you wanted to reverse mortgage of some sort, equity value is what drives that, and increased property value significantly helps. And we all know this historically, that when you have good schools in a town, you have good property value. And schools are the #1 motivator in the engine, if you will, to property values in the community, along with the other services that we have. So I don't know if you guys wanted to comment on that at all, but I welcome your thoughts on that issue.
Yeah, I hear when I talk to my realtor friends, that's the first thing people ask when they decide whether or not they're going to move to our community, is how are the schools? So investing in your schools does increase your property values. It makes your town more attractive.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, I don't know if I had any more questions for you folks, unless you each want to bring up something else that we didn't cover, or you want to address.
No, I would say there's a lot of information out there. There's also a lot of misinformation, as always. So, you could just do a simple Google search of Walpole Middle School project, and we have a whole site where we put all the documents. I mean, years have gone into this. And, we put them all there to be as completely transparent as we can be. We've had school committee meetings where we've discussed this extensively. There's been numerous presentations. There will be a presentation tomorrow night So this is Tuesday, since this will be airing multiple times, it'll be tomorrow the 19th, where we're going to have a walkthrough through the school if anybody would like to see that, and then we're going to be answering questions. There's also town meeting, which is another opportunity for people to find more information on the project. You have email addresses where you can email any of the school committee members. There's also an email address for the school building committee. It's on the website. So if you have a question, feel free to send it to us. Lots of Facebook information. The bottom line is there's a ton of information out there because we want people to be informed. This is a big decision, and we think we've been as transparent as possible through the years, talking about this as often as we can, and we want informed voters to.
Yeah. You know, it seems that one of the things that whenever you have a vote of this nature, it represents change, and people are always afraid of change. I think that's a normal thing. I don't know if you would agree, but I really think the change, but the only one thing that's constant in life is change. And so, you know, when I look around our community, and not to be overly solicitous, Brian, but when I look at, you know, the fire department and the police department in our schools, barring the middle schools, and our downtown, and how revitalized our downtown has become, and how vibrant this community is a very vibrant community, and it's getting better all the time. There's been a lot of changes, and some have been great, some have been not so great, but all in all, change brings about, I think, a positive society, and Walpole is really beginning to benefit from that. I think that we've got some wonderful leaders in charge here, yourself on the school committee and other community members. I look at the Board of Selectmen, Jim O'Neill and Mark Gallivan, and I look at and Nancy and a few other folks there. And I also look at the town administration, particularly Jim Johnson, who's done a superb job, in my opinion, about, you know, our parks look great, our fields look great, the downtown looks great. I had lunch the other day down in the center of town, and school get out early, and all the kids were down there. It was wonderful, you know, the music playing, it's wonderful. And I think that we really need this piece of the puzzle to round out our infrastructure within the community, so that we can continue to maintain that, continue to maintain a good student-teacher ratio, which is extremely important, and get our ratings back up. I know they've slid a little bit recently, but I think it's important that we focus on academics and we get our ratings back up, and I think we're going to be doing all right. So. With that said, folks, thank you for joining and thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I am not a professional interviewer, so we tried our best. And if you have any questions, please reach out to anyone here. We'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.